Hey, Rick. How's it going?
Hi. Very good.
Awesome. Okay, so a lot of people know who you are. I'm just going to introduce you anyways. Uh, for for the viewers that are new to this situation. So Rick Doblin is the founder and executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS. And he received his doctorate in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and founded MAPS in 1986. He's worked tirelessly for several decades to bring MDMA-assisted psychotherapy to medical approval, which is expected to occur in 2022. And you can read more about his work and the organization at maps.org. So we're basically going to talk for the next 45 minutes about your vision, why psychedelic therapy is the new frontier in mental health. And this series of talks is the Solidarity series of SoundMind projects. So we're also going to talk a bit about inclusion and diversity and what MAPS is doing to make sure everyone's included in this space. So I guess I would start by just saying, tell me a little bit about how you got involved with psychedelic research.
Well, I've just finished reading a really good article about, the title is called How Jewish History and the Holocaust Fueled Ruth Bader Ginsburg's Quest for Justice. And so I think we could write a similar article, How Jewish History and the Holocaust Fueled My Interest in Psychedelics. So, I was born in 1953, educated about the Holocaust from a Jewish family, and just, terrified by the way that the irrational takes over the rational and the way that people can dehumanize others and to otherize them, to otherize nature. And I just was terrified of that as I was growing up. And then early on got further traumatized still as a young boy by the Cuban Missile Crisis. And now it's not just the Germans after the Jews and the Germans trying to take over the world. Now it's the US and Russians kind of potentially blowing up the world. And then the worst part of it was, not the worst part, but the next final stage was my own country wanting to kill people in Vietnam and potentially sending me to be there. I was one of the last years of the lottery. So what really started me thinking is, how do we help people to feel connected to everything so that we don't do this dehumanizing others or people are less than? And I found the answer, one answer, many answers, but I found the answer in the mystical experience of unity, the ego dissolution experience that catalyzed by psychedelics. So at 18 in 1972, sort of in a very political time, not that different from the time that we have now, after the backlash had happened in 1970 and all psychedelic research was shut down and the counterculture was squashed and Nixon was elected and the war in Vietnam was going on. I just thought, psychedelics are an answer, the answer, but of course only one part of the answer. But so it's for political reasons. That was a decade before I learned about MDMA. And then I started realizing that psychedelics can also be really helpful for working people through trauma and how we filter the world through our past traumas. And we no longer see clearly, but we're influenced by our past negative experiences, also by our past positive experiences. So psychedelics felt to me like an area where nobody else was really trying to move them forward. It was squashed. I wasn't aware of the psychedelic underground movement. And so I was in Florida at the time or so. I just didn't really understand that there was this underground. And I was sort of reacquainted with it in 1982 when I learned about MDMA. But when I learned about MDMA, it was as a codename Adam, which was the name for it as a therapy drug, which had been used from the middle 70s to the 80s. It was kept quiet, not because it was illegal, but because the fear of that it would be made illegal, the more people knew about it. But some people in the therapeutic circles experienced it, thought it was great, and thought maybe they could make a lot of money and more people should do it, and they turned it into ecstasy. So when I learned about Adam, it was also in the early stages of ecstasy. And that was taking place in public. And this was at the same time that Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan were president and first lady, and they were ramping up the drug war, their number one thing. So it was doomed. So that's where I really got involved politically. So
how old were you then?
Well, then I was 28 when I learned about MDMA. And then through the next bunch of years was in college. And so I actually got one college class credit for suing the DEA, trying to keep MDMA legal. And my goal, though, was to become a psychedelic therapist.
That's all of our goal.
Yeah.
We're all doing it.
And of course, the other side part of that goal is to go through psychedelic therapy ourselves as well.
Right.
So I was heading for a clinical psych PhD program. That was my plan.
Okay.
And so I graduated college in '87, and I went to a new college of Florida, which is an experimental college, and it didn't have any grades. So I knew I had to really study a lot for the GREs. So I did great on the GREs, and I had really good references and all. And I got to a couple of the final cutoffs at Duke and at George Washington, where they have clinical psych PhD programs where they have psychotherapy outcome research expertise. That's what I was looking for. But at the very end, so they'll have like 400 people apply for, 6 spots, but they'll bring 12 people in at the very end. And when I would tell the professors what I want to do is MDMA research, but I know it's not possible now, but I don't want to spend 5 years here and at the end you tell me no. I'll tell you no, if I can't get permission for that, I'll do something else. A lot of the faculty were excited about that, but there was always one or two that was like, no way. And I didn't quite understand that when you go into a PhD program, they want you to do their research. They don't want to tell you. They don't want you to tell them what you want to do. So in any case, I couldn't get in. So I felt like I didn't know what to do. My whole life from 1972 till 87 was in this one direction. So I went to the old reliable tool to help me, which was marijuana. So I got stoned and I thought, what am I going to do with my life? And while I was stoned, I had this idea. Now I might have gotten this idea some other ways, but the idea was that I have a pattern. The pattern is I want too much too soon. And this is another example of the pattern. And what I want is to do psychedelic research, but the politics is blocking the science. And I thought, okay, then I need to study the politics. And there was an article in Harper's Magazine by a couple of drug policy experts, and one of them was talking about the lawsuit that we had with the DEA starting in '84, where we actually won the case. The administrative law judge said MDMA should stay as a medicine, but the administrator of the DEA rejected the recommendation. And I realized the only way through was through the FDA. That's where I started MAPS. But one of the professors, the people there that mentioned our lawsuit was a professor at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, which I'd never heard of before. And so I called him up, though, and I said, I need to study the politics of psychedelic research. Would you be my mentor if I can get in? His name was Mark Kleiman. And I managed to get in. I was sort of the token left-wing hippie of the year with all of these more mainstream people at the end. And lo and behold, that changed everything for me.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I think what strikes me is like becoming interested in psychedelics through trauma. And I think we have someone who's involved in our clinic. Sarah Cohen is going to pop in, like a surprise pop in at 6:30 to talk about Rosh Hashanah and like making amends and like what it means to have collective trauma. But I think it's really important just that you mentioned the Holocaust and how that relates to intergenerational trauma and like how that is important for today, which is the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and sort of how that overlaps with interest in psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, I think that the history of the Jewish people is the history of trauma. So even if and I think that we are entering a era where more and more people are traumatized because looking at the news, what we're doing to the environment, what icebergs melting, multiple species going extinct, the oceans being warming up and being more polluted, the wildfires. It's just climate refugees, political refugees, rise of authoritarianism here in the U.S. as well. That we're just going to have more and more people that are traumatized, and the challenges are getting greater and more consequential. And we need to come at them with more of a clearer mind and a clearer heart. So I think the need for therapy, for healing, is greater than ever before. And I think one of the reasons that psychedelics are coming to the fore now is that a lot of people recognize that. And the other part of it is just the failure of big pharma to really make a lot of progress with mental illness. That the last 30 years have been mostly bereft of new kind of breakthroughs in mental health. Ketamine for depression is the major breakthrough, which is a psychedelic-like substance that's been remarkably helpful for some people in suicidal refractory depression and other kinds of depression as well. And so I think what we see is a disillusionment with the SSRIs for depression, that they do a lot, but that they generally require you to take them for months, years, decades at a time. They have significant side effects, and they're more about masking symptoms than they are about getting to the root of the problem. And so our goal is to get to the root of the issues, help people do this deep processing that they would otherwise have a more difficult time to do without the psychedelics, and then make them help them learn about healing themselves on their own as they go forward, so they don't need drugs. So it's a completely different paradigm. You get the psychedelics a few times in the midst of therapy. It's not like a daily drug that you're supposed to take a long time. So
so can you walk me through what the process of psychedelic therapy looks like for people that don't know?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is about the method. So if you want to learn about our treatment method, we've standardized it, operationalized it in what's called the treatment manual. So if you go to maps.org, the website, on the top of the menu bar is research, then you go to MDMA. At the bottom of the MDMA page, it'll say treatment manual. So that's going to be something that's, I think, very helpful for people. But the basic idea of this is that there's going to, we call it inner-directed therapy. We don't say that we're the guide. The person is their own guide. So it's an 8-hour therapy session with MDMA with 2 therapists, usually male, female, but not always. So it's a 2-person team. One of the persons will be a licensed therapist, but we want the other person could be a peer with a lived experience without a degree. We're still negotiating with FDA about this, but the second person could potentially be someone who's a student trying to get a degree, or someone who has gone through some mental health training, like from us, the sponsor, but doesn't have to have a degree. We don't even want them to actually have or be required to have a college degree, but that's what the FDA currently requires. So anyway, we're negotiating about that. But the session is with music, with eye shades on, of the 8 hours, roughly half the time, people's eyes are closed, they're having an experience on their own. It's incredibly metaphorical and poetic. People think in imagery and tell stories. That's why I think some of the animations can be so effective, because people think in stories like that. And when you kind of do imagery and stories, but under the influence.
I'm going to show an animation at the end of this so that we can all talk about that too.
Yeah. So around the other half of the time, people are in dialogue with the therapists. That's fundamentally different than LSD or psilocybin, where there's probably 80 or 90% of the time people are quiet. A lot of times they're not even very verbal. Your ego is dissolved. It's hard for you even to speak. One of my favorite albums, by the way, from the 60s is by David Crosby, and it's a solo album, but he's got everybody from all the different groups in it. But the title of the album was "If I Could Only Remember My Name." And so that's a good description of parts of the classic psychedelic experience. So there's 3 of these MDMA experiences, 3 to 5 weeks apart, more or less 1 month apart, but it's embedded in a psychotherapeutic process. And so there are 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions too. 3 before the first MDMA session for preparation, for building a therapeutic alliance, and then 3 of these 90-minute psychotherapy sessions after each MDMA session for integration. So it's better to really think about this as therapy enhanced by the psychedelic, rather than just here's the psychedelic and the therapy is incidental. It's really a therapeutic process. And in addition to this idea of these 8-hour sessions, the method is called inner-directed therapy. So it's not scripted like a lot of therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure for PTSD. It's led by the person's unconscious. So once you have taken the MDMA, or this is very similar to LSD or psilocybin therapy too, there's a flow, there's an emergence into awareness of ideas and emotions, bodily sensations, and we follow them. And now there's different techniques that we can be using during the therapy that look like cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure, but we don't impose it on the situation. We support what's emerging. And the idea is that if there's symptoms, rather than trying to suppress them, the symptoms, we want to exaggerate them. We want to help people be taken over by them so that they can understand what's at the root of that. That's why a lot of times people are just shaking, people are crying, people are expressing. A bunch of our patients have said, I don't know why they call this ecstasy, which I think is really, really helpful to understand that.
Well, it's ecstasy if you're going dancing at a club, but maybe not ecstasy if you're lying on a bed with 2 therapists delving into your darkest unconscious memories, right?
Yes, yeah. And I think that's a really important point, Hannah, is that it's context driven.
Right.
Although we do see a lot of people that have had experiences at dancing or raves or something, and then difficult stuff comes up.
Right.
Because MDMA reduces activity in the amygdala. It makes fearful memories less fearful. And so what happens is that things may emerge. And if you're doing it in a sort of recreational celebratory context, and you only want to have good experiences, if you get something difficult and you try to stuff it back down, you could end up worse off for months,
for
a long time. So really
and I think it's important, I think, to note that that not only is this a very innovative therapy that in a lot of ways is getting at the root cause of the trauma, but the number of people that go through the phase 2 and so far the phase 3 trials that come in with PTSD and then they get treated for just 3 months, 2/3 of them walk away without PTSD. And these are people who have been treated with other modalities before. And that's a really big deal. And not only that, but they seem to keep getting better over time. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about why are people getting better over time? That we're talking years out.
Yeah. So let me just first do a little bit of the numbers. So at the 2-month follow-up after the last experimental session, chronic severe treatment-resistant PTSD, 23% no longer had PTSD. So that's therapy with either inactive placebo or low-dose MDMA that isn't therapeutic. And so that's actually really pretty good. This is a therapeutic intervention that's helping people that have previously not made much progress. When you add MDMA, it doubles to 56% at the 2-month follow-up. So that's more than doubles. And that just shows how effective the MDMA can be. But the 2/3 figure that you gave is from the 1-year follow-up. So people keep getting better. And I think what happens is that this strategy, when you're traumatized and these emotions are so fearful and powerful, and you don't know how to get through them, they take over your life. So you try to not think about them, you try to suppress them, and then they come in your dreams, and they come through triggers during the day. Something might remind you. So people are easily re-traumatized, and it's never really in the past. But in the therapy process, you learn that when things come up, you don't necessarily have to be overwhelmed. You can sort of experience them, and then you can kind of separate out, is it really happening now? And you can also, MDMA increases activity between the hippocampus and the amygdala, where we put memories into long-term storage. So people are better able to take these traumatic memories that when you have PTSD seem like they're always still happening and sort of store them in long-term memory. So once people learn that they can handle these emotions, it's painful, it's difficult, but you don't have to suppress them. You can process them. That's this sense of people learning how to heal themselves. And then you can keep doing that on your own more and more. The more strength you get, the more things you can experiment with your life, the more you can go out. And so there is this sort of self-healing process that has been catalyzed, and people are able to get better on their own. Because what we also talk about, the whole emphasis on integration, is that what happens during the psychedelic experience is very, very important. But what happens afterwards, as you think about it and integrate it and try to put things into practice, is even more important. And so that's where people start learning these skills that they can do on their own. The other thing that we try to say to people is that anything that you can experience on a psychedelic, you can theoretically, and some people do, experience without the psychedelic. Mystical states, there's all sorts of people that have mystical states without taking the psychedelic. People have had all these loving states. I mean, one good way to think about MDMA is just like a deep breath. You just can think, things can sink deeper within a second or so, and you don't have to be a patterned reaction. So we're really trying to help people learn all these ways to do this on our own without the drug. It's not, I think this is one of the big differences from the 60s. The 60s was, it's more about the drug experience. We didn't really fully understand integration. And then there was this idea that, oh, if you've had psychedelics, you're smarter than everybody else who hasn't, and you have this unique knowledge. And I think that was a big mistake as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So as you know, I went through the MAPS training a year ago in Asheville, and with Michael and Annie Mithofer, and it was definitely changed my life. I'm totally sold, very excited to be in this world. But it's interesting to me that there's I think there were like 100 other therapists in the training, and I was the only person from the analytic tradition. It's sort of in a lot of ways been lost, just, in CBT world, and like PhD psychology programs don't teach it in the same way they used to. And I think to a lot of the people there, they were like, whoa, unstructured therapy. This is so innovative, and like, this is, actually what was the origin of what we're doing everywhere. But it's really interesting that the concept of the inner healer, and that if you essentially, the MDMA enhances the relationship between the patient and the therapist, and it allows for these things to come up in the way that they need to come up. So Michael was explaining to me that, there's an agreement beforehand that you talk to a patient and you say, you're going to go through these sessions. And if you don't bring up your trauma, is it okay if we bring it up? But it's never had to happen before, because the mind has its own way of, like, if it knows you're trying to address the trauma and you're going into this therapy, it will find its way. But it might be indirect, and it might seem like totally tangential into the trauma, and that's the way that the mind can actually, the best way to go into it. It's almost like your own inner healer knows how to get there and how to heal yourself.
Yeah, and also, there's a book by Bessel van der Kolk, which is a psychiatrist expert in PTSD. The book is The Body Keeps the Score. He's the principal investigator here for our Boston site. But a lot of times, trauma that is so difficult to process doesn't even come up in an idea. It comes up in the body.
Right.
Certain kind of feelings, or stuck feelings, or painful feelings, or various kind of situations. And so we work with bodily sensations as well as sort of early signals of something deeper going on. So it's very much patient-focused, inner-directed by the patient, and it's a different approach, because therapists are used to being therapists and intervening and
giving homework. And
I think one of the things about the psychoanalysis was that it got, like a lot of religions, it gets too literal and too specific. what happened in this culture is, universally true, or
Yeah.
so a lot of Freud's theories. What I like to say, and I think it seems about right, is that Freud is like Columbus, who discovers America, but he drew the map all wrong. He sort of knew that there was some enormous unconscious continent that was influencing us way more than our rational mind, but some of the specifics that he...
And I think what's really interesting, if you go back to his writing, a lot of his writing, he's like, I don't know, I'm just coming upon this right now, like go forth and learn, I don't know all the answers, but I think the way it's been read over time is that he thought he knew all the answers, but in his actual writing, I think he knew he was just coming into something really new and important, but didn't necessarily know what to do with it. And I think in a lot of ways, it's like the people, especially in our current culture, so many people have trauma. There's like the index trauma of the DSM. That's like you can be diagnosed in a PTSD with PTSD in like a psychiatric sense, but there's also all these other types of traumas we're all experiencing every day in this culture, and with the pandemic, and with the current political situation, especially marginalized populations. So I think in a lot of ways, this the concept of like bringing out the trauma into the present and really examining it is how we get healthy. And people that I talk to a lot of times are confused why you would bring it out. Like if you suppress it and forget it, like, isn't it gone? But the problem is it's not, right?
No. And not only is it not gone, but it's more powerful the more unconscious it is.
Right.
In terms of controlling your view of things, your behaviors, your attitudes. There's this reluctance to address things directly, and it's not a successful strategy. And we have just so many people that are suffering. And so I think that we're moving towards a new approach in psychiatry. Just to give you an example, I was invited to start a monthly lecture series by psychiatric residents at UMass Worcester Medical School, which is an hour outside of Boston. And this was just a couple months ago. And I was super excited when they contacted me, because I knew that the president of the American Psychiatric Association was on the faculty of UMass Worcester, Jeffrey Geller. And so I said, I would love to do this, but can you ask him to be a discussant after my talk? And he agreed to do that. And then I said, the head of psychiatry at Tufts, Paul Summergrad, also used to be the president of the American Psychiatric Association. He's taken an interest in this area. Would you ask him to be a discussant as well? And he agreed. So after my talk, there was me and the current and former president of the American Psychiatric Association all agreeing that the wave of the future in psychiatry is going to be with psychedelics.
Yeah.
It's just such a mainstream kind of consensus. Amazing. But I have a question for you, which is about the VA. So how do you see the VA? And I guess to introduce it, I'll say that I had a talk with a couple of months ago with David Shulkin, who used to be the secretary of the VA. We were talking about how to bring MDMA into the VA, and that we're doing that at the Bronx VA. We're trying with Rachel Yehuda and the Loma Linda VA with Shannon Remnick and others there. And so David Shulkin was like, he was almost mad. He was like, "You are so naive. VA is designed to squash innovation. That there is no way you're ever going to get permission." And I was like, well, I just can't wait to tell you when we did, to show that you were wrong. So I'm just curious, Anna, what you feel is the opportunity or the resistance inside the VA that you work at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's that's a great question. I think it's really interesting, Rick, just the different levels of interest. So as you know, I'm starting a psychedelic clinic in Philadelphia, right? And essentially it's part of our nonprofit SoundMind. And almost daily I get emails from therapists in the region saying like, this is what I want to do with my life, from patients saying like, this is the therapy I need. How do I get it? And so it feels like in a lot of ways, everyone knows in my Facebook feed, it's like everyone I know knows that this is the future. So I'm like walking around thinking, everyone knows this is the future of mental health. Like, obviously you look at the numbers, you look at the interest of therapists that know that they don't have the tools they want to have, and they're like dying to have these tools, and then you go into universities or the VA, and somehow it's like people haven't heard of it. Like I find myself, I actually, when I give people the research that MAPS has done, they're often very surprised and excited. Like the psychiatry department at the VA or at UPenn, people are very interested, but it's not like, it feels like, oh, how did I miss this article? I didn't know this article. What's happening out there? So it feels very strange to be part of like two situations and scenes that are have such different understanding or level of knowledge about what's happening in the psychedelic therapy situation and approval process. So I think in terms of the VA, I've actually found people at the Philadelphia VA very interested. I think in a lot of ways, it may have to, as you said, start as ketamine-assisted therapy and sort of bridge into MDMA. It's almost like you have to start with what people already know and seems like less threatening or weird. But at the same time, at the Philadelphia VA, when I went in and said, I want to do a research project about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and they said, well, where were you 2 years ago when like the psilocybin people were coming in saying we could be part of the psilocybin trials? Like, we didn't have anyone interested, and now here you are, and is it too late? I said, no, it's not. So people are interested. I think especially if you provide the data and the research, it's not, I think in a lot of ways, just even just the psychedelic movement, using the terms, you have to sort of change the terms, like they're still using the word hallucinogen.
Right. Well, we're not going to go back to that. I mean, that is that's the government for you.
Yeah.
That's the National Institute on Drug Abuse. If you want to get a grant in these areas, you have to use the word hallucinogen, which is a negative, pejorative word. It's a delusion. It's not real. It's psychedelic is more neutral, meaning mind manifesting, but of course it's connected with the counterculture in a lot of people's minds, but that's fading, I think. But hallucinogen is an old, pathetic, tired out word that by the wayside. But it's better than psychotomimetic, which was the word before, which meant that it mimics psychosis. So I guess hallucination is one step up from psychotomimetic.
Right. I also, it's interesting because even like on Facebook, when I'll post things about like psychedelic therapy, I've gotten like flagged that they're saying like, we're not going to let you promote your material anymore. And I've like, just last night at like midnight, I was writing to like the Facebook ads people and saying like, no, I'm a doctor, like this is real. Like, and I was putting in the research that you guys have done, saying like, I'm not doing anything illegal.
Oh, well, let us help you with this. If they try to block you, we will bring the full research. We have some donations from early Facebook people. One of our main fundraisers who's helping us, who may join the MAPS board, Joe Green, was Mark Zuckerberg's roommate at college at Harvard.
Yeah.
So if they give you a hard time and continue,
we'll take Facebook down, Rick.
Yes, well, this is not part of it. We will.
This is on Facebook Live, but
well, there is absolutely no reason for them to go after you.
I think it was a robot. It was AI, and I wrote this down, and they said, "Oh, sorry." So, but it's interesting. So they lifted. I'm not banned anymore as of this morning.
Oh, good, Hannah. That was okay. Well, okay, well. We've got our own fights. We'll go after the Attorney General.
Right. Awesome.
For not licensing us to grow marijuana for our research with vets. So we just did the first research with vets with PTSD with marijuana.
Nice.
And we're now going to try to get $10 million from the state of Michigan from their marijuana taxes that they have to put out $20 million a year for 2 years for studies with veterans, mental health, and reducing veteran suicides. So.
Awesome. So I have a few questions that everyone's interested in, and then I want to show you the animation. But so for all these therapists that are extremely pumped about psychedelic therapy and may or may not have a site or may not have the means, or there might not be spots for MAPS training, what does the next 5 or 10 years look like for them? Should they, I think in a lot of ways I'm helping people understand that there will be room for everyone, and like MAPS will keep doing trainings and there's a lot of opportunities, but I think people are really hungry for this therapy now, especially therapists. So what should they do in the meantime?
Well, the first thing is read the treatment manual on our website, because that describes our therapeutic approach. Then if you go to the website also, there's an area for therapists who want to learn about our training program. So it's, you go to the MAPS website, and then one of the menu bars says participate, and then underneath there it's MDMA therapy training program. So you gave like a 5-year time frame. So what we're hoping for is the end of 2022, early 2023, we'll have FDA approval. And so we are going to be ramping up our therapy training program. And so because it's therapy assisted by the MDMA, that the FDA has policies that are called REMS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. It's a way for them to sort of tailor policies to the particular risks that need to be mitigated for each drug. And for us, because it's therapy, as I said, the prescribers and the people that treat patients are all going to have special education from us in the therapeutic portion of what we're doing. Once you're certified by us, you've done it, you can still innovate. You don't have to use our method, but at least you have to know it. So we are trying to set up collaborative relationships with a variety of different, Naropa University in Boulder, Marcella is
next on this.
Yeah. So she's going to be doing a training right now for Naropa. So I think for people who want training, I think read the treatment manual. There's Stan Groff, who's really the mentor for many of us, who pioneer of LSD research. He wrote a book called The Way of the Psychonaut and Cycling for Inner Journeys. I would suggest reading that book. We have a lot of interesting books. I think the other part is our Zendo program, where we do psychedelic harm reduction at Burning Man and other events. This was now Burning Man went virtual, but you can learn about Zendo training and go to that portion of the website, and it's similar principles as how to work with people in a therapeutic setting. I would also say, well, it's good that we started out by talking about the Holocaust. That a lot of what happened there was according to German law. So what's legal and what's moral are two different things. So, I mean, that's an obvious statement. So what I think is that,
I mean, it's not obvious for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not. But I would say for those who believe that, have your own experiences, sit with your friends, get practice, learn about it, and then we do want to increase the number of people in our therapy training program. The other, like you're talking about a ketamine clinic, that ketamine is, we believe, more effective when it's given with therapy than just like, here's a pharmacological tool and don't talk to us about what goes on. Those people that are psychiatrists or maybe therapists can get involved with ketamine clinics and really work psychotherapeutically. You can study holotropic breath work that Stan Groff developed. I think there's a lot of things you can do to prepare for this field to emerge. Friday, Compass Pathways, which is a for-profit company working on psilocybin, they went public. And shockingly, their company's supposedly, according to the stock market, worth $1 billion. They're just in phase 2. They're in phase 3, but they have their own training programs. USONA Institute is another nonprofit working on psilocybin.
And so MAPS is nonprofit, and MAPS is a PBC, which is also doesn't return, that doesn't take investors, doesn't give money back to investment. So I think that's really interesting, and it's like the first time this has ever happened, as far as I understand. And also, this will be the first time of a rescheduling of a drug, right?
Well, not exactly. I mean, so there have been nonprofit pharma before. when I started MAPS in '86, that was, I didn't know, but no drug had ever been made into a medicine by a nonprofit. And that didn't happen for 13 years later till 1999, and that was the abortion pill, or RU46.
Okay.
That was by John D. Rockefeller III, had the Population Council, and Warren Buffett was the main funder, along with the Pritzker family. But it was mainly Warren Buffett and the Rockefellers made RU46 into a medicine. There has since been some other nonprofit pharmas that have, Victoria Hale, who's joined our board of directors, started One World Institute, and they got $160+ million from the Gates Foundation to develop drugs for parasites in India and other countries that big pharma was ignoring. She also got $62+ million from Susan Buffett, Warren Buffett's first wife, to do a nonprofit development of a low-cost contraceptive, a hormonal IUD. But it's rare.
It's rare and it's expensive. You spent a lot of your time getting the funding that's needed to get this through. And also you have an anti-patent. Can you talk about that for a minute?
So in 1986, when I started MAPS, another group started a company called NDA, New Drug Application, NDA International, for Ibogaine, for opiate addiction. And they decided that forget this nonprofit model, they would do it in a for-profit way. Howard Lotsoff and Norma Lotsoff were the main ones that started it. They've got use patents so that Ibogaine is in the public domain, MDMA, LSD, psilocybin, all these drugs are in the public domain, but then you could have use patents if you're the first one to think of a use. So what I saw going on with the Ibogaine is that Howard contracted with Deborah Mash at the University of Miami to do an Ibogaine study. He ran out of money. She continued the study. She discovered noribogaine, which is a long-lasting metabolite. She then patented it. Howard said, hey, you can't patent it. I started you in this, and everything you developed, I own. And then they all sued each other. And then other people sued each other, and the whole thing. So it delayed the development of Ibogaine for decades until the patents ran out. But when I saw that happen, I contacted their patent attorney that got the use patent of Ibogaine for opiate addiction, which Howard really was the first one to think about. And I said, I want an anti-patent strategy so nobody can patent any of the uses of MDMA. And so the idea is that to be a patent holder, you have to invent the idea of something. So I just did a podcast with Andy Weil from Integrative Medicine the other day. And so we shared the story. He sent me a story of someone who had MDMA experience and it cleared up their rheumatoid arthritis. And he was like, oh, MDMA cures rheumatoid arthritis. I said, I need this woman to write this up. So she wrote it up. We put it up on our website. And now nobody can patent MDMA for rheumatoid arthritis. Think about it. So the idea is to tell the stories of all these unusual different things that MDMA can do. Recently, we've tried to make a case for the idea of MDMA for postpartum depression, so that nobody can patent that.
Right. So you're essentially putting it in the public domain. You're putting the stories so no one else can say, like, we thought of this. You're like, no, it's already obvious.
Yeah. Maybe they'll think of some other thing that we haven't thought of. In which case, I'm not opposed to people patenting it, but we wanted to make it so people could not patent MDMA for PTSD or MDMA for psychotherapy or MDMA for couples therapy or all this kind of stuff. And
then once it gets approved for PTSD, people can use it off label or get it approved for other indications.
You can prescribe things for off label. The sponsor is not supposed to encourage off label prescription. But you can prescribe it off label, but you're not going to have.
You can't tell me to prescribe it off label, but I can prescribe it off label, Rick.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Have it, let's see, how should I say it? You're not going to have it covered by insurance.
Right.
So we're going to want to try to get insurance coverage. And once we get it approved for PTSD, then we'll start, as you said, through the benefit corporation, which maximizes public benefit, not profit. We'll be selling MDMA. We'll be selling it for a reasonable profit. We'll be making money, paying taxes. And whatever money is made is going to go to the mission of MAPS, because MAPS is the 100% owner of the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. I could put in the chat the link to the section on the website, which we call Accounts of MDMA's Healing Effects. So that's where some of these stories are there.
Awesome. Yeah, that's helpful. We can put that onto the Facebook feed too, because there's some viewers there. Question about psychedelic preparation. Do you have any thoughts about what's important for preparing someone for therapy?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the most important thing, and I'd say this is also true for recreational users, is that you need to be prepared for the full range of emotions. That it's not like you take MDMA, your fear is gone, you feel fine, and your problems have just dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people go through very painful experiences. This is where we said that they say they don't know why they call it ecstasy. So I think the first part of the preparation is to make a decision. Are you willing to try to experience whatever is coming up? Another key part of the preparation, we talk about it as the therapeutic alliance, which is trusting the therapist, developing a trusting relationship. If you don't trust them, find other therapists. You need to feel safe and supported in what's happening. We actually ask people to withdraw from all of their psychiatric medications, and that can take a month or more sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people to get rid of the SSRIs, to get rid of their anti-anxiety, depression medicines, it's challenging. So we try to work with people very closely, monitoring them during that time that they're tapering off their medications. And we do that in conjunction with their prescribing physician or a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot to be said for understanding what you're getting into. So we have a very complicated but lengthy informed consent form. That's really good. There's a movie that I would recommend, a documentary called Trip of Compassion, which is on Vimeo. It's the best movie ever made, a documentary about real patients going through MDMA therapy, and it's about what the process is like. So that would give you a good insights into what it would be like. The other part of it, I think, is to start paying attention to your dreams. Because what we're
Such an
talking
analyst.
yeah, well, like it comes,
Yeah.
this membrane, we talk about psychedelics as bringing things up for the unconscious, but we all do that every night when we dream. And a lot of people
Right.
don't remember their dreams, but it doesn't mean you don't have them. And if you wanted to remember them, you could focus your time on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this process of integrating is very greatly facilitated if you pay attention to your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the themes of the MDMA experience will come to you in your dreams, or the themes of your therapy in general. So I think a practice of dream recall and thinking about it, and even in the morning, if you can just wake up more slowly, not wake up with an alarm clock and rush off to bed, but or to the day or to the shower or whatever, but take 5 minutes or 3 minutes just to try to pull those dreams there. Tools for relaxation, for mindfulness, those are good to learn as preparation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Holotropic breathwork, hyperventilation is good preparation for psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or for an MDMA therapy. I think there's, some people talk about meditation as being helpful. Personally, I am not called to meditate. I would much rather, when I get an idea, letting your mind go and you get this idea and, oh, I should do that. And then you want to be non-attached. I'd rather be attached and, get it done. I'm more of an activist in that way, but I think that, learning meditation is good preparation. Reading from the psychedelic literature is really good.
Yeah, I think my mom is actually on the Zoom right now, and I'm just remembering when I used to do a lot of these extended Buddhist retreats, and I would talk about non-attachment, and she'd be like, yeah, the thing you're doing, the detachment stuff, and I'm like, no, I'm not detached. I'm not attached,
I can understand your mom's confusion.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now, if it's appropriate, I just see Sam Sugarman has put a question in the chat.
Yeah.
What are your greatest fears around the legalization of these psychedelic compounds for medical use, pharmaceutical corporation gains? Well, I would say that what I'm worried about is that as you take something controversial, like psychedelics, and you introduce it into society, it's very important the initial impression that society gets. And so the worry that I would have is that for-profit companies would come in and think short term and cut down on the therapy to cut down on the costs and charge high prices and sort of leave people not always having good experiences. I actually feel good about Compass Pathways. One of the things that they did, the only thing I would say that they did that I think is wrong, is that they did overbroad patent claims on their process patent for psilocybin, but they were challenged and they had to withdraw those claims. So that's one concern, is you get these for-profit companies, and instead of focusing on what they can create, they focus on blocking other people from doing stuff, which we see a lot of times in pharma. So that's a worry, that they try to scale too quickly, that they're out for making money on the stock but not on the real substance. Again, I don't see that with Compass, but I see that with some other companies. You know, I worry that, well, a good example is to talk about ketamine. You know, Spravato and ketamine for depression has been approved as a pharmacological treatment without any psychotherapy. And it does work that way for a lot of people, but I think people would get better outcomes if they had therapy. And now there's starting to be some studies, you know, to confirm that, but a lot of ketamine therapists believe that already. So I think we get suboptimal outcomes, and then that can compromise the ability to really roll it out in society when you have some suboptimal outcomes. But what they do is, it's like maximization of profit for the pharmaceutical company rather than maximization of outcomes for the patient. So when you provide ketamine without therapy, the results fade, you don't do the integration, they just keep coming back for more and more ketamine. So that's good for the pharma company, but it's not the best for the patients.
It can also lead to like dark experiences that make trauma worse, you know, if you don't have someone safe with you.
Yeah. You know, then I don't know how much I'm worried about it, but I am thinking about all the direct-to-consumer ads, you know, ask the doctor if MDMA is right for you. You know,
Terrible. I hate that.
With all these, like, you know, psychedelic company ads on TV.
Yeah.
We've made some for fun. I mean, or some slides of some of these ads. So I think it's humorous. Maybe it could be an animation. Maybe you could make the ad for, you know, ask your doctor, you know, maybe your PTSD has a cure, you know.
I hate that as my future life.
Okay, well,
no, but so related to this, as we have talked about over the phone several times, I'm working on a product to prepare people for psychedelic experiences, potentially co-founding it with Marcella, who's coming on next. And it's a really big debate, like with others involved, as to whether you take investors, or you know, will that give you the means to actually develop a really good product, or are you then going to be beholden to people that aren't going to prioritize the needs of the patients and are going to prioritize profit over everything else? And I think it's really hard. You know, you can have a PBC, but also there's things that change if you take investors that want a return on investment, you know?
Yeah. Well, what mostly changes is the price. And then they try to cut down the expenses as well, make more profit. So then they're going to try to find this spot where it's the minimum cost and the maximum profit. On the other hand, the good part of that, in a sense, is that, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of millions of people with depression. There are, you know, probably hundreds of millions of people with trauma when you start looking around the world as well.
Or everyone.
So we really do need to figure out, how do we do this economically?
Right. And how do we roll it out to the world? And a lot of countries in the world don't even have, you know, therapists that we can train. You know, there's just a lot of places that don't have the person power to have people sitting 8 hours that don't necessarily have any background in psychedelics. So I think it really is about how do you make it, how do you create products and programs that make therapists feel comfortable leading someone into something that could be like really heavy and difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we need the for-profits. I don't think they're inherently evil, but the tendency to maximize profit over anything else, you know. So capitalism itself is helping to create innovation, but it's also helping to destroy the world with this idea that externalities doesn't count in your profits, and you lose.
Right. Which, like, for people that don't know what an externality is, it's like a company that would like throw trash in the ocean and they don't have to pay for that and it just disappears. And for them, it leads to more profit that they don't have to like recycle it. They just like toss it somewhere, but it costs the society something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I did that just because I was typing in response to some of the questions in the
chat. Nice. What are the answers?
Well, the idea of the idea of an apprenticeship program. I think we need that for the U.S. I think we need that everywhere because we want to keep the two-person model, but it's more effective and it's safer. It's safe. Women who've been sexually abused having a male therapist, under the influence of MDMA, they might not feel safe. I think we want to keep the two-person model to the extent we can, but for economic reasons, we want the second person to be charging nothing as like getting hours for their license or charging little or not as much as the first person. If they're a massage therapist or a music therapist or a student that's learning or an apprentice that's learning but isn't in a program to get a license. And so I think that's kind of apprenticeship program is really an important idea, and it's the practical way to try to keep a two-person treatment team together without it becoming too expensive.
Totally, because I think that will be a major barrier to rolling it out is just the cost of the labor. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anything else that we should talk about before?
The one big thing to say is that we will know in a month from now if our first of 2 phase 3 studies was statistically significant. So we're thinking we'll know on October 20th or so.
I remember I asked you, you said, there was some data coming out at a certain point in January, and I asked you a year ago, like, how will we know? Are you going to announce it? And you said, you'll know by the look on my face if you see me. Because I'll look like not okay if it doesn't say,
Yeah, we're working to try to give an exclusive to a major media. So we're still working on that. But yeah, we want the world to know. And we're hopeful. I mean, we could be wrong and maybe it won't be significant, but we think it's likely to be based on the interim analysis results. And so that's the next big thing. And then this idea of moving to Europe.
Yeah.
Big picture that we need to globalize this.
And
we need to actually raise another $30 million to do that. And that's the big test is, does the philanthropic model work compared to all these investors? The advantage of for-profit is that you've got easier access to capital. Compass has just raised over $200 million. I mean, in the history of MAPS, we've raised over $100 million, but that's over 34 years. They've raised $200 million over the course of the last year and a half or something like that.
Right.
So there's investors willing to throw their money at them.
Right. Well, because you have to convince people you're going to invest, you're going to put your money in this organization, and then what you get out of it is like a better humanity, and they can say like you get dollars back. I think, And
we're also wanting to say too that in a sense we're going to be a check on the for-profits. To the extent that there's a nonprofit, we're going to try to do best practices, and that'll maybe the USONA Institute as the nonprofit psilocybin will be a check to some extent on the for-profit psilocybin. So yeah, we have a harder, and our best challenge now is this 30 million we need to go to Europe and globalize. If we can't do it, that means we're not really serving the patients well, because they're in need and they don't care for-profit, nonprofit, but they would care depending on the price, depending on the quality of the services, things like that. So I think, it's our challenge to really demonstrate that nonprofit can scale. And that will be our big challenge. So we're going to wait to get the results. And if this study was statistically significant, then that'll really increase our ability to persuade people to help us globalize.
Yeah, totally. And you've always succeeded at raising the money you need. So I'm not worried.
It's enormous amounts of money.
And
I've always been worried, but we've always succeeded. So
it's true.
that's maybe the difference. We've succeeded because I've worried.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. You don't stop.
Right.
Well, Rick, thank you for coming on. Shana Tova.
Yeah. Yes, my pleasure.
Yeah.
And I think if I can stay, I'll watch you and Marcela for a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to pull her on in about 5 minutes, and yeah, stay on. And
okay.
Maybe if you have, we could pull you on if you're still around a little bit later.
Okay, I may need to go do other work, but we'll see.
Okay, cool.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Hannah.
Bye.